In the Wizarding World, a Boggart is a shape-shifting creature that can take the form of the worst fear of whoever looks at it. Boggarts are non-beings and they are also immortal, meaning they cannot be killed. However, they can be banished with the Boggart banishing charm, Ridiculous. In this video, we're going to be looking at every single Boggart for every single character that has a known Boggart. And to make things interesting, we're going to be including all the Boggarts from the books, the films, and the games, as well as the forms they take once Ridiculous is cast on them. Harry Potter. Harry's Boggart is a Dementor in the books, the films, and the games. His fear of Dementors could represent the trauma from the attack he received from a Dementor on the train. However, it's also used to represent the fact that Harry's biggest fear is fear itself, which really kind of shows how brave Harry is. When Harry first went up against a Dementor, he had to be shielded by Lupin, who thought that the Boggart would take the form of Voldemort. Of course, the Boggart Dementor's effect still had some of the abilities the Dementors had, including the Despair, but it was nowhere near as strong as that of a real Dementor, and it could not suck out your soul. In both the book and the film, Harry managed to vanquish the Dementor Boggart by using Expecto Patronum and sealing it back in its box. In the book, Harry also came across a Boggart Dementor in the maze task of the Goblet of Fire. He used Ridiculous on the Boggart and the Dementor disappeared. This Boggart didn't return in the film version of the Goblet of Fire because the maze task was changed so the maze is alive rather than there being obstacles in the maze. This was most likely behind the scenes due to budget cuts. In the game, however, the Boggart can be seen in the maze, however it can also take the form of another depending on who looks at it. In the film, Harry manages to seal the Dementor back in the box with Expecto Patronum. In the game, Harry does not gain Ridiculous because in the game, Harry can only use Expecto Patronum to vanquish the Dementor Boggart. In the game, the Dementor Boggart will die upon Expecto Patronum being used. Lupin will teach Harry how to use Expecto Patronum privately, and Harry is also the only student in the game who can use Expecto Patronum, whilst also being the only character who cannot use Ridiculous. While a Dementor Boggart cannot harm you like a regular Dementor in the game, if Harry or any other characters go near a Dementor Boggart, they will cower in fear and their movements will be slowed and they'll be unable to jump. Ron Weasley. Ron Weasley's Boggart takes the form of a giant spider. This is symbolic of Ron's fear of spiders. He is absolutely terrified of them. Spiders, acromantulas, pretty much anything that's an arachnid. When Ron uses Ridiculous on the giant spider, its form varies depending on which version. In the books, the giant spider will just simply lose its legs and basically become a rolling, legless spider body. In the film, as well as the game, the spider will instead gain roller skates on all 8 of its legs and skate in place uncontrollably, which in my opinion is a little bit more hilarious. Either way, whether it has 8 legs on roller skates or no legs at all, the spider became far less threatening due to its inability to harm our good friend Ron. Hermione Granger, my personal favourite character. Hermione's Boggart takes the form of Professor McGonagall telling her that she's failed all of her exams. Obviously, this coincides with Hermione's fear of failure. She obviously studies very hard, and the thought of failing scares her. And it's very gut-wrenching to hear McGonagall telling her that she failed everything despite how hard she worked. We only really see this Boggart in the books. When Hermione uses Ridiculous on it, it instead changes to McGonagall telling Hermione that she's passed all her exams. This Boggart was not shown in the films, however it was filmed in a deleted scene. In the games, Hermione's Professor McGonagall Boggart does appear, however rather than McGonagall telling her she failed all her exams, she just simply presents to her a troll exam, but due to the fact that the games have no dialogue. And obviously when Hermione uses Ridiculous on it, it instead changes to McGonagall presenting Hermione a trophy. Remus Lupin, or Professor Lupin. Lupin's Boggart takes the form of a glowing white orb surrounded by clouds, which we later find out is a full moon. His Boggart obviously takes this form due to the fact that he's a werewolf. He's afraid of, well, every full moon because that's the night he transforms, which is something that he's had to live with since he was 4. He's visibly ashamed by it. It's just a reminder that every full moon, he's not the same kind person you know him as. He becomes a monster, which is something he's been fighting his whole life. The Boggart's ridiculous form differs from book to film. In the book, the full moon just disappeared. However, in the film, it transformed into a flying balloon that lost all its helium and then flew back into the closet. In the game, it's the same as the film where it transforms into a balloon, however, instead flies into the treasure chest with a thud, destroying it. Neville Longbottom. Neville's Boggart is Professor Snape, his potions teacher. Where his fear from Snape stems from differs from book to film. In the book, it's obviously due to the fact that Snape was really nasty and cruel to him and almost bullied him and made him feel very what's the right word? Worthless. And constantly would go out of his way to target and humiliate him. In the film canon, however, Snape is a little bit more different. He's not really as much of a bully at all. He's more like just a strict teacher. So more like his fear of Snape in the film canon is mostly due to the pressure and stress that he puts on Neville. Not really so much that he's a jerk to him like in the book canon. At least not as much. When Neville used Ridiculous on his Snape Boggart, it took the form of Snape wearing Neville's grandma Augusta Longbottom's clothes, complete with a red handbag. Oh man, I always picture... How many of you pictured Snape dressed as an old lady? Hilarious, am I right? In the film, the Snape Boggart is almost the same. I bet Alan Rickman had a very fun time dressing as an old granny. In the game, like the book and the film, Neville's Boggart is Professor Snape. However, for some reason, the ridiculous charm does not work on the Snape Boggart in the game whenever you're playing as Neville. It's kind of weird. I tried it like a few times. I thought something might have been wrong, but it never did work. However, his ridiculous form is still Snape in Neville's grandmother's clothes because we actually see it in a cutscene. Even though it's not in the actual gameplay, it's still in one of the cutscenes for the game, so it still counts as part of the game's canon as well. Seamus Finnigan. Seamus Finnigan's Boggart is a banshee. Banshees are a creature in Irish folklore that have beautiful singing voices, but their singing is so beautiful that they often lure people to crash themselves on the rocks. They obviously live near rivers and lakes, and people have drowned because of them, and this is where Seamus Finnigan's fear of banshees stems from. When Seamus Finnigan used Ridiculous on the Boggart, the banshee just simply lost its voice and became silent. Seamus's Boggart is not seen in the films, however in the games, oddly enough, his Boggart just simply takes the form of Lord Voldemort. And when he uses Ridiculous on the Boggart, Voldemort would just simply turn into a baby Voldemort sucking on a pacifier. We'll get into a little bit more of this later. Parvati Patil. Parvati Patil's Boggart in the books is a mummy. A frightening mummy. When Parvati used Ridiculous on the mummy tripped on its bandages and its head came off, rendering it completely harmless. In the film, however, Parvati's Boggart is actually very different. It instead takes the form of a giant black snake, a cobra to be exact. When Parvati used Ridiculous on it, it became, well, far scarier. It turned into a giant Jack-in-the-Box. In the game, however, Parvati Patil's Boggart is the same as it is in the book. It once again takes the form of a mummy. However, unlike the book, its ridiculous form is different. Rather than the mummy tripping on its bandages, in the game the mummy just simply shrinks, becoming far more harmless and diminutive. Dean Thomas. In the books, Dean Thomas's Boggart takes the form of a crawling, disembodied hand. That's pretty creepy. However, when Dean used Ridiculous on the hand, it instead got caught in a mousetrap, rendering it completely harmless and unable to move. In the films, we never see Dean Thomas's Boggart. However, in the games, Dean Thomas's Boggart is completely different. It instead took the form of a giant eyeball, looking very creepily in his direction. When Dean Thomas used Ridiculous on the eyeball fell to the ground, becoming completely harmless and, well, almost like a ball. Padma Patil. Padma Patil's Boggart was never seen in either the books or the films. However, in the game, it takes the form of a giant black snake. well, a cobra to be exact. This was her twin sister Parvati Patil's Boggart in the films. In the books, Parvati's Boggart was a mummy. However, in the films it was changed to a giant black cobra. However, in the game, Parvati's Boggart was changed back to a mummy like in the books, and instead the cobra Boggart was instead given to her twin sister Padma. Anyway, like in the film with Padma's snake Boggart, it will once again turn into a giant jack-in-the-box for Padma as well. Lord Voldemort. Lord Voldemort's Boggart would take the form of, well, himself dead. This fear stems from Voldemort's own fear of death. His number one goal in life is to live and rule forever, and the thought of death absolutely terrified him. Terrified him enough to actually kill people to split his soul in order to assure immortality. We never see this Boggart in either the books or the films. It was instead confirmed by J.K. Rowling on her website in an interview. In the games, however, due to the fact that obviously including, well, a dead body would be... They wouldn't be able to include that and also keep the game at an E rating. So, naturally, Voldemort's Boggart was instead changed to just simply being Harry Potter. And when Voldemort uses Ridiculous on his Harry Boggart, well, his Harry Boggart dies. When Voldemort uses Ridiculous on his book canon Boggart, it's unclear what it becomes. It's never mentioned. Although personally, I think if they were going to go for another big fear of Voldemort, naturally Dumbledore would have been his second biggest fear. Because it's been mentioned several times that Dumbledore is the only man Voldemort ever feared. Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore's Boggart was only confirmed by J.K. Rowling on her official website in an interview. His Boggart takes the form of the dead body of his sister Ariana Dumbledore, who died when she was caught in the middle of a duel between him and Grindelwald, well, alongside his brother Aberforth Dumbledore. Fear not only stems from the trauma of her death, but also the fact that it's unclear whose spellfire hit Ariana and killed her. Dumbledore's also living with the fear with the fact that it actually could have been him who accidentally killed his sister. Its ridiculous form is unknown. It was never seen in the books or the films. However, in the games, showing this would kind of ruin the game's E rating. So instead, Dumbledore's Boggart instead takes the form of Lord Voldemort's. And when Ridiculous is used on it, it turns into a baby Voldemort sucking on a pacifier. Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley's Boggart was only seen in the Order of the Phoenix book. It takes the form of her husband Arthur Weasley, all 7 of her kids, and Harry, all dead. Lupin jumps in and takes care of the Boggart. However, we don't actually see its ridiculous form. It was never shown in the films either. In the games, her Boggart just simply takes the form of Voldemort, and its ridiculous form is a baby Voldemort sucking on a pacifier, because obviously her book canon Boggart would be too grim for the game and would require them to raise the game's age rating. The following characters have no shown Boggart in either the books or the films. Their Boggart is only shown in the game, so naturally they're all these characters' Boggarts, which is simply take the form of Lord Voldemort's. Their ridiculous form is also the same as well. A baby Voldemort sucking on a pacifier. Obviously the fear of Voldemort was widespread during his reign, up until his death at the end of the Battle of Hogwarts. So naturally, everyone's Boggart took the form of him because he represented the biggest fear among all people in the Wizarding World. It's ironic because Lupin actually thought Harry's Boggart would be Voldemort, but it wasn't, it was a Dementor instead. After Voldemort fell, all these characters' Boggarts would have most likely changed to something else. Some characters like Hagrid, Dobby, and Griphook, who cannot really use spells or have very limited use amongst spells, they can't really do anything about their Boggarts. Additionally, in the games, Muggles, Squibs, and Ghosts, they do not have Boggarts. The Boggart will not emerge for its chest if you're playing as a Muggle, a Squib, or a Ghost. Which is kind of contrary to the actual book and film canon, because Lupin's Muggle mother did have a Boggart, which took the form of a crazy man, which, well, his father Lyle Lupin took care of, with a ridiculous charm turning into a mushroom, and that's how their love story began. Well, obviously, Lyle told, the woman now Mrs. Lupin, that the Boggart was simply a very dangerous man. He didn't tell her the truth straight away because he didn't want to scare her any more than she already was. However, in the games, muggles, squibs, and ghosts cannot see Boggarts. Now for theories. For a few characters whose Boggarts are Voldemort in the games, I do believe that they might have had a better Boggart in canon had it actually been shown. The first one is Ginny Weasley. Now obviously in the games her Boggart takes the form of Voldemort. However, more specifically, I also believe that her Voldemort could have been Tom Riddle with the diary. Obviously, being possessed and taken down into the chamber did a great number on her, and she really went through a lot that year. Having to go through it again would be horrifying for her, especially having to relive being under Tom Riddle's full control. Alternatively, her Boggart could have also taken the form of Lucius Malfoy. While Tom Riddle was the man who possessed her, Lucius Malfoy was the very man who made it possible by slipping that cursed diary into her cauldron. Filthy scumbag. For the ridiculous form, I could imagine, well, probably the same, but Lucius Malfoy in a complete onesie and a pacifier. That would be a hilarious sight. Colin Creevey. Colin Creevey's Boggart in the games is obviously Lord Voldemort. However, naturally, the thing that he loves more than anything is his camera. So seeing that broken would be horrifying for him. I do believe his Boggart would probably take the form of seeing his camera completely destroyed beyond repair. As for the ridiculous form, it would take the form of not only a completely fixed camera, but one that is indestructible and new and improved. Dobby. Dobby's Boggart in the games obviously takes the form of Voldemort, and unlike most characters, due to the fact that he's a house elf without a wand, there is nothing he can do about his Boggarts, but it would probably have the same ridiculous form as everyone else. For my theory, I think his Boggart would take the form of Lucius Malfoy, once again regaining full control over him. Lucius was a horrible master to Dobby and often abused him, and treated him like he's nothing. So having to go back under his control would be a nightmare for poor old Dobby. Death Eaters. More specifically, Barty Crouch Jr. and every other regular Death Eater, well, with the exception of Lucius Malfoy and Peter Pettigrew. Like I said, nearly every character's Boggart in the game is Lord Voldemort. And this even includes all the Death Eater characters too, including Lucius Malfoy, Peter Pettigrew, Barty Crouch Jr., Death Eater, and McNair. While it would make sense for people like Lucius Malfoy, who lied about his loyalty claiming he was under the Imperius Curse, and Peter Pettigrew, who only rejoined Voldemort out of fear rather than loyalty, it wouldn't really make sense for the regular Death Eater or Barty Crouch Jr. Especially Barty Jr., who was unconditionally loyal to Voldemort, so him fearing Voldemort above everything else wouldn't really make as much sense. Naturally, I think their biggest fear would be Albus Dumbledore, because Dumbledore is the most powerful wizard of all time and the only wizard Voldemort ever feared. So, loyal Death Eaters like Barty Crouch Jr. fearing him would make far more sense. As for the ridiculous form, I believe it would probably take the form of, let's say, Dumbledore becoming like an old shriveled tramp with a hunchback. He would be far less threatening and probably laughable in that state. Professor Snape. Like most other characters, Professor Snape's Boggart takes the form of Voldemort in the games. However, my theory is that his Boggart would probably take the form of seeing Lily dead. Lily J. Potter, the love of his life. Lily was his childhood crush and friend. So, seeing her dead, which he actually had to live and face the reality of, would be horrifying for him. Especially because in the film canon, he actually literally saw her dead. So having to relive that would be soul-crushing for him. Its ridiculous form would probably be unknown, but it would probably be her alive again. Remember, if I'm missing any characters, it's mostly due to the fact that I'm only covering things from the books, the films, and the main games. Nothing from like games like Hogwarts Mystery or Fantastic Beasts was included in this video. But anyway, that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below if I missed any Boggarts, any of your theories for certain characters' Boggarts, or to make things interesting, what would your Boggart be? Let me know down below. Bye!